Hi, I'm Susan Matthews. Welcome to the Subverse, where we uncover stories that lie in the margin and journey from the cosmic to the quantum, from colonial histories that haunt us to reimagining our futures, from the complexity of development to the art of resistance. In this episode, we hear from Nityanand Jayaraman, or Niti, a Chennai and India-based writer and social activist, and a member of the Chennai Solidarity group, a collective that fights environmental injustice and discrimination. In the conversation, he speaks of the Poromboke, or commons, such as water bodies, grazing lands, and community forests. With increased pollution and encroaching development in infrastructure projects, these spaces and people's livelihoods are under grave threat. The song that runs through the podcast is Chennai Poromboke Padal, conceived by Niti a few years ago, written by Keber and sung by T.M. Krishna. It speaks of how we need to revalorize these commons and shows us how art can be powerful in protest. For this podcast, you will hear mostly from Niti, as he is a great raconteur, and I, for one, did not want to stem his flow. So we have added some sections that frame what he says, keeping him as the main storyteller. Hope you enjoy the episode.
பொறம்போக்கு உனக்கு இல்ல பொறம்போக்கு எனக்கு இல்ல பொறம்போக்கு ஊருக்கு பொறம்போக்கு பூமிக்கு பொறம்போக்கு உனக்கு இல்ல பொறம்போக்கு எனக்கு Welcome, Niti. I would like to start by asking you what you can tell us about the song. Why was it created? What do the lines mean? And what is it talking about?
Good. So, Chennai Poromboke Padal. The key word in this is Poromboke. And the word Poromboke is a medieval Tamil agrarian revenue term that describes commons or spaces, communal spaces that are put into shared use by different members of the community. These commons are to be found all over the world, and all of us are beneficiaries of commons. You can't even enjoy private property without a healthy commons. The air is a commons. Your water is from the commons. All life comes from the commons. The pollinators are all living in the commons. So your food comes from, essentially, has to have a healthy commons for pollination to happen and for food to arrive on your plate. But interestingly, in the medieval Tamil culture, and leading up to till about 300 years ago, the commons, because of their importance to the common people, has been strictly protected by local law, where the commons have only three rules. The Poromboke has three rules. You cannot build a roof, you cannot lay a floor, and you cannot buy or sell it. In a sense, this is not property, and it falls outside the capitalist mode of production. And it may be because of this that the word has degraded over time since British came in to colonize India, and in their colonization attempt was a very important property making agenda. And the Poromboke Commons frustrated their designs because these could not be, you could not find an owner to buy the commons from. You could not find anybody who would sell it to you. You could not build it. You could not build on it. And as a result, it kind of fell outside their designs of deriving value. And slowly the word Poromboke started degrading in public use and culturally because the British government, after the East India Company was taken over by the Crown, the British colonial government took over the Poromboke Commons, and these became quote unquote government lands. The community's hold over the commons started slipping. So the Poromboke Commons, because they lay outside the grand design of deriving value from everything slowly began to be referred to by the people in power as a wasteland, as useless, because the crown or the king or the government cannot extract any revenue from these lands. So, for all practical purposes, in their perspective, this was wasteland or lazy land that was not working for its keep. And if you look at the kinds of commons that we have lakes, grazing grounds, burial grounds, roads, grasslands, herbal gardens, sacred groves. All these things fall under the classification of Poromboke Commons. The word itself started degrading in public use, and now it's come to mean a useless, worthless person or a useless, worthless place. It's a pejorative. The Chennai Poromboke Padal, the song you just heard, was meant to remind us how important open, unbuilt spaces are to keeping us alive and to allow us to enjoy and to allow us to write inspiring poetry or make beautiful paintings. The Poromboke is very important. It's something that we ought to have valorized, but we have devalorized it and converted it into a pejorative. And the song was an attempt to revalorize the Poromboke Commons. The song was made about a year after Chennai suffered from a debilitating floods in 2015. And the floods were blamed on climate change. But it wasn't climate change, it was land use change. It's because Chennai as a city had built itself, covering up all the water bodies, blocking the courses of water. And water has a memory. It returns to the places that it usually has visited. And so the city was flooded because water had no place to go, and all the places that water usually goes to rest or flows had been occupied by construction and buildings in this mad kind of a push for growth. And so the song actually says that that was your fault. Your land use change was a fault. And the same problem of building without respect to water is also what led to the 2019 water scarcity. So the problem of scarcity and the problem of floods both have a common root in what we do to our land and how we value or undervalue the Poromboke Commons.
In this section, Niti speaks about conflicts around the Poromboke, which have been driven by economic growth and developmentalism, moving from diversity and pluralism to narrowed and elitist definitions of how we see our cities and streets.
There is a conflict between the users and the beneficiaries of the Poromboke and the agenda of economic growth driven by a corporate industrial model. So I'll give you an example of that. In Chennai, there are plenty of conflicts around the Poromboke. So there is a very large beach called the Marina Beach, which is the pride of Chennai. And south of the Marina Beach is a fishing village, which probably predates the city of Chennai. And it's a fishing village called Nochikuppam. The fisher folk have lived there for more than 300 years. We don't know if they've been there before Chennai became a city. They're still there. The women ply their trade. They sell fish on the side of what is now a road, but sitting on the beach. Now they're sitting on the beach and they also sit on the street because the street, the salai or the road, as a Poromboke has multiple uses. It does not have a monopolistic use for mobility. That's why you see cows ambling on the street. You see children playing on the street. You see people selling things on the street. You find people who are asking for alms on the street. You have a small little circus on the side where somebody's tied a tightrope and somebody's walking on it. There's all kinds of things that are happening on an Indian street. But more of late, what we are seeing happening is there is an attempt to define the street as belonging only for fast moving vehicles, and everything else must make way. And as a result of this kind of a mindset, which primarily is a mindset that afflicts the wealthy and the elite, there is an attempt to now beautify and make this road on which the fisherwomen are selling their fish into a high-speed transport corridor. The fishermen have to cross this road to get to the beach and to set off on their boats to go get fish. And converting this into a high-speed corridor would mean that the fishermen's safety is at risk. So now you see the contours of a conflict. You have the Poromboke users who are fighting to keep a hold of the road as a space for vending, that is commoning, that is Porombokifying, if I may, of that street. On the other hand, we have the High Court. Interestingly, it was not even the government of Tamil Nadu that came and said there should be a high-speed transport corridor. It was one judge in the High Court who happened to take that road to come to court, who said, oh my God, this looks ghastly. The man does not eat fish. That's a separate matter. He found this entire thing insulting to his aesthetics and said that this place must be cleared of the fish vendors. The fish vendors are not moving. They will stay there. And if you move them, they will return there. Without open, unbuilt spaces that you can take inspiration from or take a deep breath in, you cease to be a human being. And that is the situation of many of us. And that is the reason why you find very pitched battles against what is called development across the world. And mostly the wise ones who see this are the indigenous people and the farmers and the fishers and people who live closer to the land. I think it's a civilizational conflict.
I think there's a contrast between built up environments and open earth environments or open earth economies. How would you sort of define the two? And what are the differences that you see between these two different kinds of environments?
This is a phrase that I'm trying to play around with. It's not really out there in popular use at the moment. But this is something that is inspired by the learnings that I have obtained through my interactions with various people, primarily from the fishing community, because that's where my learnings are largely from, by working along the coastal parts of India and more in Tamil Nadu. What we're finding is that across the country, and I'm also seeing in other places, there are pitched conflicts which are called environmental battles that are against development projects that intend to pave over open, unbuilt spaces. There might be expressways, superhighways, there might be strip malls, there might be a large airport. And all these things, on the one hand, are said to be required, essential for progress and prosperity and development. But at the same time, there are pitched battles by local communities against it, with increasingly arguments that also have an international kind of a tangent to it. For instance, if there's a fight against an airport, the predominant objection to it comes from what is happening to my land and what that means to me. So it is a change in land use from an open earth land use or an economy that derives from value from leaving the land open to a paved earth economy where value is sought to be derived from paving over that surface, constructing an airport, digging a mine, building a dam, building a road, an airport, or whatever. These conflicts against the paved earth economy used to be primarily local. But what we are seeing very interestingly is what hurts the local also hurts the global. So, what the land use change that leaves a community more vulnerable to floods or droughts or extreme weather events, which are likely to intensify with this changing climate, are also activities that reduce the ability of the land to absorb carbon by denuding it or increase the amount of carbon emissions of that land by the degrading land use.
We'll be back after a break. Here, Niti speaks about how the only infrastructure that seems to matter is an infrastructure of commerce, as opposed to an infrastructure of survival. It is a high-stakes numbers game with bankers calling the shots.
The only kind of infrastructure going right now is mega infrastructure. It's the infrastructure of commerce that is seeking to replace the infrastructure of survival, of sustenance of local communities. So look at the preoccupation of the governments. The governments are my state government, my national government is beholden to the large banks. They're constantly trying to let people know that their money is welcome. They're trying to lay out the red carpet. They're trying to impress the banks. But for the local people, for the people of India, the government kind of meets us with water cannons and batons. So you have a system, a democratic system, so to speak, which actually is preoccupied with making bankers happy. So financial viability matters more than political viability because a political viability will be dealt with an iron fist. So be it in North Dakota with the protesting Native Americans or in India where the government is dealing with any environmental, quote unquote, environmental protests with an iron hand, with jailing. I mean, right now there's one a feminist leader from Chhattisgarh who has been jailed for protesting against the alienation of indigenous lands. There's another in Odisha, there's a coal mine that is to come up in the Sundargarh region, where the indigenous people who are protesting against it, particularly women, have been arrested and jailed. But this coal has the backing of international capital.
I love this part when Niti speaks about North Chennai, where we find Eno Pulikat wetlands, influenced by the tides, sandy dunes, a magical place between land and sea. All very magical till somebody decides to build large ports.
I'll give you a story about North Chennai. In the north of Chennai, Chennai, for those of you who are not very familiar with the layout of India, is a southern Indian coastal city. It is the capital of a state called Tamil Nadu. And the city has sandy beaches. It has a very high energy Bay of Bengal, which is not one of those calm, well-behaved seas. It's an extremely badly behaved sea. Every year it behaves badly. We get our monsoons, we get our rains through cyclonic storms, and the land has shaped itself very interestingly. So we have coastal plains. So Chennai is in a coastal plains, and you have the on the eastern side is bound by the Bay of Bengal, and in the coastal plains we have slow-moving rivers that discharge their water into the sea through tiny estuaries. And because seasonally the rivers bring in a lot of water, most of our rain falls in maybe 2 to 3 weeks in the months of November and December. And so the volume of water that flows through these rivers wanting to exit to the sea is huge. And the estuarine openings are not large enough to carry that kind of water. So what the river does is it carves for itself a very large backwater which is tidally influenced. And then, in the north of Chennai, there's a place called the Ennur Pulicat wetlands. And these are sprawling wetlands, tidal wetlands that are influenced by the tide, which are the western boundary of a barrier island. It's a sandy sand dune, carpeted with sand dunes, an island that separates the sea from the lagoon called the Pulicat Lagoon. Now, this place is magical. First of all, one doesn't know whether you can call it a land because this is temporary land. It's actually something that the sea has conceded to the land, and the sea will take it back whenever it wants. So these places have been largely categorized as Poromboke. The tidal wetlands have been categorized as several types of Poromboke. You have salt marshes, which are called Uppangari Poromboke. You have the river mouth into the sea, which is called Kadarkari Poromboke. Then you have the floodplains, which are called Kariveli Poromboke. Then on the sides of it, on the edges of it, you have seasonal water bodies, which when they dry up are great for grazing grounds, and they're called Meikal or Meichal Poromboke. On the island, you have the Kadakare Porambok, which is the seaside commons. And then you have dunes and you have springs that emanate from those dunes, which are called Uttakal Porambok. Then you have man made or human made water bodies like ponds, which are called Kolat Porambok, Eri Porambok. So your entire landscape is just a mosaic of Porambok, diversity. And that ecological diversity then translates into livelihood diversity, because where you have multiple habitats, you have multiple livelihoods, you have multiple cultures that emanate from those livelihoods, and multiple identities. So, in this beautiful, magical barrier island, which technically belongs to the sea, and you can go there and use it, you can enjoy it as long as you don't decide to pitch camp over there and stay there forever. And so over there, the government of India and the government of Tamil Nadu decided to build large ports. And right now, there is a battle against the expansion of a port that is currently occupying 331 acres. And there's a company called Adani, which is a family owned company which has witnessed the fastest growth and the largest addition of wealth. They added $16 billion in the 10 months of the lockdown, which puts them ahead of other people like Elon Musk and other billionaires in the world. Now, this company wants to expand a port on this ecologically fragile barrier island from 330 acres to 6,100 acres. And out of the 6,100 acres, they will create new land by dumping earth on 2,000 acres of nearshore sea. They will occupy 3,200 acres of wetland commons on the landward side, on the western side of the barrier island. And in this, they describe all these places almost as if these are terra nullius, that it's a land where nothing exists, which is a concept that colonizers usually use to justify their entry. Um, it has been described as land that is not very productive, it is barren, and it is unused or underused. On the contrary, when this information was told to the people of that region, we found that there are 2,500 women who are fishing in the lagoon and the tidal backwaters, who make a living out of hand picking shrimp and crab. And these 2,500 women are all from the most marginalized sections of society. And the most marginalized sections of society are not supported by the World Bank or the government of India, the government of the United States, or USAID. These are people whose only succor is the Poromboke Commons. So if I were to wonder what is the spine of the Indian economy, it is the Poromboke. So you have 2,500 women making a living out of the Poromboke Commons, handpicking shrimp and crab. You have another 250 women who are gathering shells, including by diving into the sea on the seashore. Their livelihood is based on a healthy Karakkarai Poromboke or a seashore Poromboke. You have in just one village called Naramanathapuram, there are 500 heads of cows or cattle and 1,000 heads of goats. And these are largely an economy that is controlled or maintained by women. And in the case of Ramanathapuram, it's mostly elderly women, single women, widows who are dependent on this. These cattle, livestock, graze on 1,200 acres of grazing Poromboke and Uppankari or salt marsh Poromboke. There are another, say, 500 or so women who are who purchase the fish and add value to it by drying it and also sell it. So these are fish vendors and fish value adders, fish workers who also make a living. For all of them, a healthy seashore and a healthy tidal backwater, a healthy grazing grounds, these are all essential. They have to remain open, they have to remain accessible, they must never be built on. And if all this is taken care of, then you look at this the number of women supported households that actually get to survive. Not just that, if these things are destroyed, it is not just the women that you're hurting. Because if you occupy this 3,200 acres of area which water used to occupy and construct your industrial estate on it, the city of Chennai will be drowned because the amount of water that would have stayed over here would enter your city. The water is not going to disappear just because you got a permission from the Supreme Court or the Pollution Control Board. So I think that people keep talking about playing with fire. Playing with water is more dangerous.
When you painted the picture of this absolutely magical island, I was like transported. And then you talk about the devastation that follows and how shocking all of that is. I think this is really the story that we see all over.
Look at what happened last year with the whole pandemic. It brought us down to our knees. But what is very interesting is this the human hubris. We never cease not to learn. What I meant is we don't learn. And we've been delivered the tightest slap in recent history. And here we are, and the economy is apparently recovering, which means it's bad news for everything around us and our future. We're going back to business as usual. It's almost as if the scientists who are telling us about the global ecological crisis are, just singing some kind of a gibberish song. None of the countries in the world actually have acknowledged very seriously that this economic model that is based on infinite growth is going to kill us.
பொறம்போக்கு உனக்கு இல்ல
If we
பொறம்போக்கு
could move on to something that I would really like to talk about, and it's really inspired by that wonderful song that we started this discussion with, which is kind of looking at the role of art in mobilization and resistance against developmentalism. And I know that that is something which really thrives in the city of Chennai. So if you could speak a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, just the Chennai Poromboke Padal itself was actually a 4,000 word article that I wrote that I haven't read since then. And I think that I wrote it for a publication called Seminar, which I'm sure some people have read, but a handful. The message was important, and the issue of Poromboke was being discussed in our collective. A collective has a lot of young people, and young people like to have fun, and music is a great way to have fun. One excellent lyricist, a songwriter called Kebar Vasuki. And so we said, let's talk to Kebar and give him this 4,000 word article and ask him if he can do something better with this. And he came up with a 3.5 minute indie rock song, Tamil song. So the first version of that song was actually released in September 2016, and it was a indie rock song for 3.5 minutes. It didn't do very well because the visuals that we went with it were a bit abstract and people didn't get it. The song was fantastic and I loved the lyrics. We converted that into a Carnatic song. Now, Carnatic is very interesting because Carnatic music, unlike hip hop or rock, which are very grounded, which are very earthy, which are used by people to express themselves about love failures, about emotional waves and ups and downs, about aspirations and frustrations. The Carnatic music deals solely with the divine and is kind of remains unchanged. It does not deal with mundane stuff. And also, it happens to be quote unquote a classical form. One doesn't know who actually gave it the branding that it was classical, and there's something else called folk. At the end of the day, all music is aesthetics. You either like it or you don't. And the Carnatic music fashioned itself as a classical form to be practiced only by certain elite communities or upper castes, is listened to by the same community in extremely exalted spaces like the opera house. And those places can only see those kinds of music. Now, the idea behind the Chennai Poromboke Padal and how it was released and why it was done is also not just to break the impression that we have about glorifying modern economic development that is based on paving the earth and highlighting the importance of the Poromboke, there was another agenda to it. It was also to bring this actually a wonderful art form called the Carnatic art form down to earth, to make it more meaningful and to allow it to deal with subjects other than the divine. One can deal with the divine too. I have nothing against it. Please go ahead. But let it also, lend itself to the project that we have at hand of saving ourselves. And so art is particularly useful because this 4,000 word article may have been read by about 200 people, 500 people, maybe 1,000. But when it is converted into good art, when it is expressed as an art, it reaches a much wider audience. And we can have a conversation like this over podcast with the song, being the starting point. How would you have liked it if I had given you my 4,000 word article?
I did read the article. I prefer the song. Just kidding.
Art attacks at a cultural level, not just at a cerebral level. It attacks at a cultural level. It by celebrating the Poromboke through a wonderful song with visuals that stick to you, I can create a mood that will allow you or prevent you from disrespecting the Poromboke, to treat it lightly. So I think that kind of a mood setting culture shifts, which is what is required, is something that is possible, I would hazard to say, only through art, not through laws.
What do you think comes next for Poromboke in terms of its revalorization, in terms of protecting it, let's say, from these big infrastructure projects? Where do you see this going? And also for our listeners, I mean, what can they do to support these movements in their own way?
The fight by the commoners to protect the commons has shifted the political culture, at least in this state. Is the shift enough? Definitely not enough. But what I see in this is that it is a very welcome shift. It shows that the message has gone through to the political parties. So we have a situation where all political parties, barring one, have a section on protection of lands and water. And most of these political parties have also made very clear statements supporting people's fights against big ticket infrastructure projects, be it the 8-lane expressway or the Adani Kattupalli port that I just talked about earlier. Big political parties, which have had a very pro industrial history, are now talking for the protection of agricultural lands, the protection of wetlands and water bodies, to the point that they have said that there cannot be any further exploration for oil and gas in the entire Kaveri Delta, which is huge to say that this place will be protected as an agricultural zone. And if oil is found beneath this land, it will not be taken. That, I think, is an acknowledgement for that open earth economies have value. That is a perceptible shift that needs to go much further, where this is only showing up in their election manifestos. Now we need to make the political parties walk their talk. And then we need to have cultural shifts that say, okay, let's start designing our economy where we reorient ourselves from saying that value comes from the paved or the built up area. So now, for example, if I have a plot of land, about 1,500 square feet or 1,500 square meters, I'm looking to maximize the amount of buildings I put over there, because inside the buildings I can have a shop and then I can sell more things and I can make more money. What would it be if my metrics were to change completely? If you look at how the Indian fisherman lives, for him or her, the land that they occupy for their homestead is a very small area. Their livelihood, they're always gazing seawards. And for them, there's a sprawl of about 10,000 square kilometers of sea, which must remain unbuilt, and a tiny 400 square foot house. They don't pay much attention to it. In fact, most of the fishing hamlets are on Poromboke. They never bothered to get a private title to those lands. If you look at the village structures, the area which has been reserved for construction, for built up area, will be a small area. It might be about 2 acres. But that acre will have about 500 acres of private agricultural land and about 1,000 acres of commons, because everybody needs commons. If you want to breathe, you need commons. You can't hope to enjoy your private property because the air from the neighboring factory might invade your wonderful penthouse suite. So all of us have to be vested in protecting the commons, and that's something that we have neglected. And the hope is that in valorizing the Poromboke, we will realize that our future is a shared future, and that shared future comes from a healthy commons, and that we must be putting our energy into keeping the commons, maximize the commons, and keep it unbuilt and healthy.
Thank you. You've said that so well. I really don't want to say anything after that. Thank you so much, Niti.
Bye, 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 Susan. Thank you.
Thanks to Nityanand Jayaraman for sharing his thoughts with us. The Subverse is the podcast of Dark and Light, a digital space that chronicles the times we live in and reimagines futures with a focus on science, nature, social justice, and culture. We have more information about all our guests and their work in the episode show notes on darkandlight.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at darkandlightzine. If you like the show, please tell a friend and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. The Subverse is produced for us by Waka Media. So long, and thanks for listening.